The story of the King of the Cats has ended, and he has been turned into stone. And we are now going to follow the King of Ireland's son as he goes back to the little sage of the mountain who knows where to find the Sword of Light. The Sword of Light and the unique tale with as much of the adventures of Gilly of the Goatskin as is given in the Craneskin book. He came to the house that was thatched with the one great wing of a bird, and as before, the little sage of the mountain asked him to do a day's work. The king's son reaped the corn for the little sage, and as he was reaping it, his two foster brothers, Dermot and Donal, rode by on their fine horses. They did not know who the young fellow was who was reaping in the field, and they shouted for the little sage of the mountain to come out of the house and speak to them. "We want to know where to find the Goban Seor, who is going to give us the Sword of Light," said Dermot. "Come in," said the sage, "and help me with my day's work, and I'll search in my book for some direction." "We can't do such an unprincely thing as take service with you," said Donal. "Tell us now where we must go to find the Goban Seor." "I think you have made a mistake," said the little sage. "I am an ignorant man, and I can't answer such a question without study." "Ride on, brother," said Donal. "He can tell us nothing." Dermot and Donal rode off on their fine horses, the silver bells on their bridles ringing. That night, when he had eaten his supper, the little sage told the king's son where to go. It is forbidden to tell where the King of Ireland's son found the builder and shaper of the gods. In a certain place he came to where the Goban Seor had set up his forge and planted his anvil, and he saw the Goban Seor beating on a shape of iron. "You want to find the Sword of Light," said the Goban, his eyes as straight as a line of a sword blade. "But show me first your will, your mind, and your purpose." "How can I do that?" said the King of Ireland's son. "Guard my anvil for a few nights," said the Goban Seor. "A fua comes out of the river sometimes and tries to carry it off." The Goban Seor had to make a journey to look at trees that were growing in the forest, and the king's son guarded his anvil. And at night a fua came out of the river and flung great stones, striving to drive him away from the anvil. He ran down to the riverbank to drive it away, but the creature caught him in its long arms and tried to drown him in the deep water. The King of Ireland's son was near his death, but he broke away from the fua, and when the creature caught him again, he dragged it up the bank and held it against a tree. "I will give you the mastery of all arts because you have mastered me," said the fua. "I do not want the mastery of the arts, but maybe you can tell me where to find the Sword of Light." "You want to know that, do you?" said the fua, and then it twisted from him and went into the river. The fua came the next night and flung stones as before, and the king's son wrestled with it in the very middle of the river, and held him so that he could not get to the other bank. "I will give you heaps of wealth because you have mastered me," said the creature with the big eyes and the long arms. "Not wealth, but the knowledge of where to come on the Sword of Light is what I want from you," said the King of Ireland's son. But the fua twisted from him and ran away again. The next night the fua came again, and the king's son wrestled with him in the middle of the river and followed him up the other bank and held him against a tree. "I will give you the craft that will make you the greatest of kings because you have mastered me." "Not craft, but knowledge of where the Sword of Light is, I want from you," said the king's son. "Only one of the people of light can tell you that," said the fua. It became a small, empty sort of creature and lay on the ground like a shadow. The Goban Seor came back to his forge and his anvil. "You have guarded my anvil for me," he said, "and I will tell you where to go for the Sword of Light. It is in the palace of the Ancient Ones under the lake. You have an enchanted steed that can go to that lake. I shall turn his head, and he shall go straight to it. When you come to the edge of the lake, pull the branches of the fountain tree, and give the slight red steed the loaves to eat. Mount now and go." the King of Ireland's son mounted the slight red steed and went traveling again. From all its branches, high and low, water was falling in little streams. This was the fountain tree indeed. He did not dismount, the King of Ireland's son, but pulled the branches, and he gave them to the slight red steed to eat. He ate no more than 3 mouthfuls. Then he stamped on the ground with his hoofs, lifted his head high, and neighed 3 times. With that he plunged into the water of the lake, and swam as if he had the strength of a dragon. He swam while there was light on the water, and he swam while there was night on the water. And when the sun of the next day was a hand's breadth above the lake, he came to the black island. All on that island was black and burnt, and there were black ashes up to the horse's knees. And no sooner had the slight red steed put his hooves on the island than he galloped straight to the middle of it. He galloped through an opening in the black rock, and went through 100 passages, each going lower than the other, and at last he came into the wide space of a hall. The hall was lighted. When the king's son looked to see where the light came from, he saw a sword hanging from the roof, and the brightness of the sword was such that the hall was well lighted. The King of Ireland's son galloped the slight red steed forward, and made it rear up. His hand grasped the hilt of the sword. As he pulled it down, the sword screeched in his hand. He flashed it about and saw what other things were in the cave. He saw 1 woman, and 2 women, and 3 women. He came to them, and as he saw, they were sleeping. And as he flashed the sword about, he saw other women sleeping too. There were 12 women in the cave where the sword of light had been hanging, and the women were sleeping. In the hands of each of the sleeping women was a great gemmed cup. The spirit of the king's son had grown haughty since he felt the sword in his hands. "You have the sword, why should you not have the cup?" something within him said. He took a cup from the hands of one of the sleeping women and drank the bubbling water that it held. His spirit grew more haughty with that draught. From the hands of each of the 12 sleeping women, he took the cup, and he drank the draught of bubbling water that it held. And when he had drunk the 12 draughts of bubbling water, he felt that with the sword of light in his hands, he could cut his way through the earth. He mounted the slight red steed and rode it through the cave, and swam it across the lake with no name. He held the sword of light across his saddle. The steed went as the current drew him, for it was long since he had eaten the leaves of the fountain tree, and the spirit that had made him vigorous coming was feeble now. The current brought them to the shore below where the fountain tree grew. And there on the shore he saw a bunch of little men, little women, and littler children, all with smoke-colored skins, all with but 1 eye in their heads, all crying and screaming at each other like seabirds, and all sitting round a fire of dried water weeds, cooking and eating eels and crab-apples. The King of Ireland's son put his hands on the bridle rein and drew the slight red steed out of the water. The woman with 1 right eye, and the men with 1 left eye, and the children, in their bare smoky skins, screamed at him, "What do you want? What do you want, man with the horse?" "Feed and water my steed for me," said the King of Ireland's son. "We are the Swallow people, and no one commands us to do things," said an old fellow with a beard like knots of rope. "Feed my steed with red wheat, and water it with pure spring water," said the king's son fiercely. "I am the King of Ireland's son, and the sword of light is in my hands, and what I command must be done." "We are the Swallow people, and we are accounted a harmless people," said the old fellow. "Why are ye harmless?" said the king's son, and he flourished the sword at them. "Come into our cave, king's son," said the old fellow. "We will give you refreshment there, and the children will attend to your steed." He went into the cave with certain of the Swallow people. They were all unmannerly. They kept screaming and crying to each other. They pulled at the clothes of the king's son and pinched him. One of them bit his hands. When they came into the cave, they all sat down on the black stones. One pulled in a black donkey loaded with nets. They took the nets off its back, and before the king's son knew that anything was about to happen, they threw the nets around him. The meshes of the nets were sticky. He felt himself caught. He ran at the swallow people and fell over a stone. They drew more nets around his legs. The old fellow whom he had commanded took up the sword of light. Then the swallow people pulled up the donkey that had carried the nets and rubbed its hard hoof on the sword. The king's son did not know what happened to it. Then he heard them cry, "The brightness is gone off the thing now." They left the sword on a black rock, and now no light came from it. Then all the swallow people scrambled out of the cave. They came back eating eels and crab apples out of their hands. They paid no attention to the King of Ireland's son, but climbed into a cave above where he was lying. He broke the nets that were around him. He found the sword on the black stones, with the brightness all gone from it because of the rubbing of the donkey's hoof. He climbed up the wall of the other side of the cave to punish the swallow people. They saw him before he could see them in the darkness, and they all went into holes and hid themselves as if they were rats and mice. With the blackened sword in his hands, the King of Ireland's son went out of the cave, and the horse he had left behind, the slight red steed, was not to be found. Without a steed, and with a blackened sword, the King of Ireland's son came to where the Goban Saor had set up his forge and planted his anvil. No water nor sand would clean the sword, but he left it down before the Goban Saor, hoping that he would show him a way to clean it. "The sword must be bright, that will kill the king of the land of mist, and cut the tress that will awaken the enchanter's daughter," said the Goban Saor. "You have let the sword be blackened. Carry the blackened sword with you now." "Brighten it for me, and I will serve you," said the King of Ireland's son. "It is not easy for me to brighten the sword now," said the Goban Saor, "but find me the unique tale, and what went before its beginning, and what comes after its end, and I shall brighten the sword for you, and show you the way to the land of the mist. Go now, and search for the unique tale." He went, and he had many far journeys. I can tell you, he found no person who had any knowledge of the unique tale, or who knew any way of coming to the land of mist. One twilight, in a wood, he saw a great bird flying towards him. It lighted on an old tree, and the King of Ireland's son saw it was Laheen the eagle. "Are you still a friend to me, eagle?" said the king's son. "I am still a friend to you, king's son," said Laheen. "Then tell me where I should go to get knowledge of the unique tale," said the King of Ireland's son. "The unique tale? I never heard of it at all," said Laheen the eagle, changing from one leg to the other. "I am old," she said, shaking her wings, "and I never heard of the unique tale." The king's son looked and saw that Laheen was really old. Her neck was bare of feathers, and her wings were gray. "Oh, if you are so old," said the king's son, "and have gone so many places, and do not know of the unique tale, to whom can I go to get knowledge of it?" "Listen," said Laheen the eagle. "There are 5 of us that are called the 5 Ancient Ones of Ireland, and it is not known which one of the 5 is the oldest. There is myself, Laheen the eagle. There is Blackfoot the elk of Ben Gulban, and there is the crow of Achill, the salmon of Osero, and the old woman of Beer. We do not know ourselves which of us is the oldest, but we know that we 5 are the most ancient of living things." "I have never heard of the unique tale," said Laheen, "but maybe one of the other ancients has heard of it." "I will go to them," said the king's son. "Tell me how I will find the crow of Achill, the elk of Ben Gulban, the salmon of Ashero, and the old woman of Beer. Tell me how to go to them, Laheen the eagle." "You need not go to the salmon of Ashero," said the eagle, "for the salmon would not have heard of any tale. I will get you means of finding the other 3. Follow the stream now until you come to the river. Wait at the ford, and I will fly to you there." Laheen the eagle then shook her wings and flew slowly away. The King of Ireland's son followed the stream until he came to the river. The river of the ox it was.